Okay, we're not getting started yet, but I know a lot of people have been asking about this. So we're going to do a little session on discovery of the Maryland Transit Authority website. This is not intuitive, or well, it functions. It's actually really convenient from here. If you would like to take the light rail from here to BWI Airport. So this is a fairly easy walk down the hill to there's, I don't know if many of you may have had dinner last night in Mount Washington Village, which is just on the bottom of the hill. There's a light rail stop there. If you go to mta.maryland.gov, that's the Maryland Transit Authority website. And on the right-hand side, about halfway down the page, is a link to the schedule. And you want the light rail schedule, and this is it. Southbound. The reason I'm throwing this up here on the screen is because it's not intuitive. It does not list every station stop. We are between Lutherville and North Avenue. So when looking at it, you probably want to go by the time that is under Lutherville. It'll be maybe 5 minutes after that when it actually shows up. Not every train goes to BWI. So you have to look on this column to see which train actually, if it has a time in the BWI column, those are the trains that stop at BWI. You can get on a Cromwell Bridge train, but you want to get off it before, they'll tell you basically, if you want to go to BWI, get off and get on the next train. Trains roughly run every 25 or so minutes, and I think it's about an hour trip on the light rail. It's around the time we will wrap up. It is probably the fastest and most convenient way, most reliable way to get to BWI. And it is also the cheapest. I think it's $1.70. So, for example, could you in the back, can we scroll this up a little bit? So when I keep going. No, other way. Other way. A little bit further. No, I want a later afternoon. I want a later afternoon slot. So okay. For example, this is 5:45 train arriving at BWI. Leaves roughly 4:42. It also takes a couple minutes to buy a ticket, because you have to buy a ticket before you get on. So if you want to be on the 4:42 train to arrive at 5:45, you want to leave here maybe 4:15. That'll give you plenty of time. Everybody okay? You do not have to change at Penn Station. It's a direct line. If you're going to Penn Station, you could get on this, and you get off at the, yeah, you can just walk over. So get on the train here, and you can get on any train, and there's an any train about every 10 minutes. You'll go 6 stops, I think, to the Mount Royal station. Get off the light rail at Mount Royal Station, and then you will walk to the left as you're facing south, the way the train is going. You'll walk to the left about 2 blocks. There's also a connector train, which is sort of useless because it goes about 500 feet. But it's a really quick and easy walk. There's also a sign at this station that says, walk this way. And if anyone wants taxis, or if you have Uber, Uber is great. But if you want a taxi, talk to Devon or Juliana. We can get taxis arranged. Any other questions? Excellent. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, testing, testing. We are testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. We seem to be working. Yep. Hooray. Okay.
All right. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed a nice evening on the town here in Baltimore. So as I mentioned yesterday, the purpose of what we're trying to do here is both education as well as engage in conversations about where we can head. What's the future of discovery of library resources and where things are headed in our community, and what can NISO do about that? We talked a lot yesterday afternoon in the roundtable discussions about some ideas, kind of near-term issues. Some of the groups touched a little bit on horizon or more horizon issues. But what we hope today is to focus more attention on the longer term with regard to discovery. And what are some of the bigger issues? How can we really push discovery of library resources? And how are we being pushed as a community in addressing some of these challenges, like non-English language text or non-Western European text or non-textual material? Or how is technology changing and impacting discovery? So today, as I mentioned yesterday, we're not going to have a day full that is packed with presentations as much as a day that is talking about, with you all and the people on the live stream, about where we could head, about where we can affect change, where NISO can play a role in this. This mic seems to be cutting in and out. We're having some mic problems.
How about this one? Ah, this one works.
This one works? I will get really close to Neil. A few logistic statements. The first being this afternoon, there is an optional lunch discussion about the LibHub initiative and linked data and its application in libraries, especially as it relates to discovery in libraries. This is an optional lunch. If you're interested in participating, there's space upstairs on the second floor for roughly 40 people. So hopefully not everyone wants to participate, but if you want to do that, you can take a tray for lunch, go upstairs, take the elevators upstairs to room 202. There'll be signs, and that conversation will take roughly about 35, 40 minutes. So if you're welcome to participate in that if you would like. Many thanks to Atlas Systems for sponsoring that discussion. Speaking of sponsors, I want to thank again the sponsors who've helped us organize and underwrite this event. So thanks to EBSCO and Ex Libris, ProQuest, Elsevier, Sage, and Atlas. So those are the kind of highlights. Hopefully we've resolved all of the technical issues, and it seemed like the live streams was much more stable in the afternoon, and I hope we're all set with all of those technical issues. I think we're good there. We will do the same sort of routine with the Horizon issues as we did yesterday with the tables and numbering the tables and also the SurveyMonkey to get a democratic decision about which table we will live stream. So we will get that set up. Again, we have a few spots left for Horizon issues that we can have conversations on. I noticed that we didn't get 10 tables all organized together, so maybe we can be okay with 8. But if you have any ideas during the break about Horizon issues that you'd like to discuss, please put them up on the whiteboard. And again, if anyone's on the live stream and would like to contribute their ideas to that as well, we're monitoring both the Twitter and the social chat on the Ustream. So with that, our keynote presentation today is by Neil Grindley, who is head of resource discovery at the Jisc, formerly the Joint Information Steering Council Systems Committee, but it's just become the Jisc. Importantly, it's no longer all capital letters. So anyway, to kick us off this morning, Neil.
Great. Thank you very much. See if I can place that in the right place. Is that working? Okay, thanks so much, Todd. Yes, Jisc as an acronym makes just about as much sense as it did spelled out. However, we have new branding, as Todd says, and that betokens a change in Jisc recently. So we've been going through some transition and turning ourselves into a bit of a new organization. So it's been quite exciting to work there over the last couple of years. Okay, so before I get started, perhaps just say a couple of words about yesterday. I found yesterday really helpful, and I thought the discussions were excellent. Two things really that struck me I wanted to just mention. And the first is to do with NISO. And I'm not saying this just because they are our genial hosts, and thank you very much, Todd and Juliana, for inviting me to speak. I was very struck yesterday that NISO is extremely well placed to actually convene a discussion of this sort, getting the people in the room, getting the vendors, and getting the publishers, and getting the librarians all together. In the past, I've thought that maybe Jisc could play this kind of role in the UK, and I think we've tried to do it on occasions, certainly in the digital preservation area, which I used to work in. But I don't think it actually works quite as well as it does in this context. So I think this is really encouraging that NISO should be convening this discussion, and that we should be trying to get together ideas for Todd and his colleagues. So that was great. The second thing that struck me and kind of grew as a thought during the day was around the complexity and the investment and the sheer slog and effort that it takes to actually put these discovery indexes together. And I think, I mean, kind of one has a sense of the size of these things, but it's not until you start discussing actually what it takes to put these things together and how much effort and staff, time, etc. So, and that feeds usefully into some thoughts that we've been having at Jisc about where we should go, what our direction should be. So it sort of reinforces our strategy quite usefully. So anyway, it's just a couple of thoughts that I had from yesterday, and I hope that we'll have similar useful discussions today. So let's just check this. Oh, look, here we go. So I'm here to sort of give you a UK perspective. I was thinking, looking at the list before I came, that it was mostly, almost all of you are going to be US delegates. Could I just show of hands about who's made it over here from Europe for this event? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so half a dozen of us or so. It's useful to know just to sort of keep a check on people's travel budgets and the appetite for, coming to events like this. So I've got up there future of resource discovery from a UK perspective, and that's kind of a little bit ambitious, a little bit maybe presumptuous even. I can't speak for the whole of the UK, so let's just check, what my perspective is, where I'm coming from here. It's from a Jisc perspective, so I'm very interested in our, future activities and the activities that we are going to take forward in the UK with our strategic partners over the next few years. It's obviously through the lens of higher education. Jisc is an organisation that works on behalf of UK universities and colleges and helps them with all things to do with digital technologies and content. It's mostly actually from a librarian's viewpoint as well. It's easiest for us and it's usually more profitable for us to interact with the library sector and to work with them on their strategies. And we take a strategic vantage point. I'm not a practitioner. I have worked in libraries, but I'm not a librarian. Ultimately, it's to advance teaching, research, and scholarly communication rather than sort of vendor activity or outside of that sector. So that's just to say where I'm coming from. And to kind of a bit of a spoiler for later on, just to sort of get you in the mood for where I'm heading for with this. What it really means, what our thinking over the next few years really means is that it ends up being more about data rather than resource discovery for us. We've come to this conclusion over the last period of working, and that's why I say that learning about the complexity and investment into discovery indexes kind of backs up this strategy that we're going to be adopting. And I'll go into this in a bit more detail. But just to sort of show you around the house just very briefly, just in case I suspect a lot of you know what Jisc is and does, but for those who are less familiar, we basically do four things. We're a charity, and half of our budget goes on providing the network backbone for UK universities and colleges, around about half, probably just less. We look after digital resources, services, and content. That's the directorate I work in. We do advice and engagement, and we do R&D in our Futures Directorate. So that's the kind of range of things that we do on behalf of the sector. Who funds us? I think this is important for you to know, just so that you kind of have an idea of what our remit is, what we're kind of capable of. 80% of our funding comes from the government and research councils and education funding councils. 20% is coming from institutions. Give you a ballpark figure, that 80% represents around about 60 million. Okay, so, and because I'm over from the UK and I'm talking from UK perspective, I thought we'd start really with some things, some perceptions that I've heard recently about the UK, kind of what's going on in the UK as opposed to the US. So people are aware that we have Jisc in the UK to coordinate activity. That's good, obviously. We hope to do that. And there's a feeling that there's a sense of a willingness to collaborate in the UK and share data, and I hope that's true. So we've got the US Library Consortia are more numerous, more embedded and more mature. We could be interested to get your views on this. That there's more attention and use of open source software in the UK, in the US. And this last one, you might, I don't know, those of you who are struggling with your budgets or to get hold of budgets, might wonder why I put this here, but there's this feeling in the UK that US libraries are rolling in money. Yes, maybe. Right. So, I seem to have got louder all of a sudden, which is okay. So the questions that NISO asked us to address here, it's a bit goes to Christmas past, present and future, as Marshall said, but the way I'm sort of referring to them is kind of current landscape, focusing on this idea about meeting user access needs, and then what we're going to do to sort of adapt and evolve as we go forwards over the next phase of working. So I'm roughly going to be taking on those three different sections during the rest of this talk, which I've got another 3/4 of an hour. That's good. Okay, so I'll just start. I mean, even though Jisc isn't particularly well placed to sort of focus very closely on the kind of vendor landscape, as it were, because we're sort of a little bit to one side of that, but this is an image of the sort of market share, if you like, of the discovery systems in the UK, or at least it was. And I'm sorry that this slide reflects the situation about 2 years ago, just under 2 years ago. I couldn't put my hand easily on anything more recent than that, so obviously things change fairly regularly. But I think what this shows is kind of what we talked about yesterday. And in fact, a lot of the things I'm talking about or will talk about are a kind of are a reinforcement or confirmation of many of the conversations we had yesterday. So that's I guess reassuring, or it tells us something anyway. And so what have we got here? I should always say, like all of these things, like all of the figures and tables and graphs that I'm going to put up here, there's always something going on with them. If you pick them apart a little bit, then they don't. There's ways you can read them and ways that they break down. This is only actually 54 institutions that responded to this, and so when it says Blacklight is 2% of the market share, that's actually one organisation really. That's the University of Hull. Which has a very interesting Blacklight implementation. And I would think, now apologies to EBSCO and ProQuest in advance here, because anecdotally, that when I've been at meetings recently, I have to say that I hear more mention of the Ex Libris products than anything else. So I don't know whether that betokens that things are going their way in the UK at the moment. I don't know. Of course, looking at this, it could also mean, and thinking about the nature of the events that I go to and I hear these things at, we put on these workshops and things for people to come along and talk about their problems. So if people are talking a lot, I won't go any further with that, but anyway, so that's just a sort of note about kind of how to read these things with a skeptical eye. Okay, so, and as I say, that was from a couple of years ago, so to sort of bring things up to date, and because I think that going out to events like this and going out to events in the UK on a regular basis is so useful, it's so helpful. It's, even though you're kind of getting individual opinions from people, if you add them all together, and over time, you can start to hear trends and see trends, and so I think that these individual statements from people in these organisations, in this instance, I couldn't remember all of the organisations. I think there was a couple more at this event, but we're talking about these sorts of institutions and representatives, very knowledgeable, expert representatives of these institutions, coming up with these kind of problem statements about resource discovery at the moment, and it might be worth just sort of digging into these. You'll notice I've blanked out the names of the vendors to protect the innocent or protect the guilty or something. So this first one is a bit flippant. Is the problem that we're disappointed with our users? They just won't do what they're told, the wretched people. That's a bit more meaningful than you perhaps might think, because it goes into the next two as well. We're worried about the things that our users won't discover. And there's this, in the next two comments, there's this notion of this one-stop shop. And so there seems to be this tension, I think when we talked about this yesterday, between what the users want and what the libraries would like to give them, or what they believe the users would actually benefit from using. And so this one-stop shop idea and the things that users miss or may miss, and the resources that can be made available in this one-stop shop, it's a hard problem. And librarians in the UK, as they are here in this room, are worried about this and worried about how to solve this. I'm sure the vendors are too. And then we get some hand-wringing down here. We have imposed a vendor method onto people. How do we convert information into knowledge? Is someone getting a little bit more philosophical here? Does it reflect the user journey? I think it's these kinds of kind of excuse me, things that librarians are concerned about and want to try and fix, even though the fixes for these things are extremely difficult to actually work through. We're giving people a lot of tools, but does it work for all different discovery groups? This speaks to this notion yesterday, I think, about horses for courses. Different people studying law, studying sciences, studying humanities, all have different requirements and need configurations to be set up in different ways for them. With law students, I hardly mention our one-stop shop, which is because their resources are elsewhere. Okay, we need a patchwork of solutions. Can users get to the appropriate item if they come in from different routes? Oops, wrong way. So this coming in from different routes, is coming in from outside, this remote access to our systems. This is something that I hear a great deal, and we struggle with this with some of our services in Jisc. I was talking to Todd last night about authentication systems in the UK with Shibboleth, and you imagine that might sort things out for us in the UK Access Federation. It does to a certain extent, but it's not the complete solution. And certainly the coming in from mobile devices is something we hear a lot as well, and the problems of using these services, discovery services from mobile devices. And so now down towards the bottom, 3 remarks and concerns about data quality, and this again is something that I hear all over the place really, and so the main issue is data quality, and it's this last one here. It's not quite hit the mark at this as the service that we've implemented in terms of discoverability. It tells the students there may be a resource. It might be a library item, or it might be a repository item. It's frustrating for the user. And there's this idea yesterday about someone was talking about when the user comes to the system for the first time. If there's disappointment there, they walk away, and it's disproportionately colours their whole sense of what the library can do for them. And they go away into the refectory or the bar and say the library's bust, and that's not good. And that I think is based or underpinned by the quality of data, and this is certainly a theme that we want to pick up on in Jisc in terms of our strategy going forward. So that was a bit doom and gloom, but let's kind of think about actually the good things about discovery systems and some of the kind of percentages that I think we saw yesterday, or were talking about yesterday. This is the University of Manchester, largest single-site university in the UK, small by US standards probably. I think it's 40,000 students, so smaller than University of Maryland, but nonetheless significant. A large institution. And somebody at the same event was telling us about this survey. 80% use Google, which surprises me. I would have thought it would be more than that. Again, you have to question who's saying these figures, where they're coming from. But 71 also use Primo. So there it is, usage figures. So there was significant use of the library system. I think that's pretty clear to us all. The library systems are important to staff and students. They're not going away. There's not a clamour of people saying that these library systems, what can we use them for? And I put this here, 10% use COPAC. Now COPAC is a system. It's the Jisc resource discovery service that I sort of have principally in my focus in terms of what we're doing over the next couple of years. And obviously that looks low. I mean, it is low, and it's no surprise to us. Actually, it's a bit of a surprise it's that high, to be honest, because of other figures I'll show you in a minute. But however, COPAC, as I say, is the thing that Jisc has, and to some extent it continues to be focused on to deliver bibliographic data in an aggregation to, well, it's an open service, so it's globally available. I don't know how many of you have had cause or need to look at COPAC, but it's there for all to use. As are many of these other services. I just put these up just so you can get a feel for the kind of range of services that Jisc offer to the library, to libraries, some of which require authentication, some of which there's JUSP, which is the Jisc Usage Statistics Portal. KB Plus is to help manage journals. There's a lot of sort of journal-related services here. So yeah, I mean, I won't go in any further. I won't try and describe them all, but do have a look around and see if there's any that can be of interest or inspiration for you. So COPAC, let me just explain a little bit about COPAC and why we're interested in this, and then sort of building a strategy around or away from COPAC, if you like. So it's it's an aggregation of around about 90 different library catalogues. It's got a very nice, clean interface. That's the good feedback we get from the user survey, and I think it is easy to use. Records end up looking displayed like this. These are two individual records, and you've got does this work? Yes, you've got the covers over here, and then you've got the list of all of the institutions there that have copies of said item, and so we've got 12 institutions down there. And what COPAC does is it takes in all these records, it deduplicates them, it displays a consolidated record, and so that ends up being kind of the Uber record that if we could have a feedback loop and feed it back to institutions, or if they wanted us to, then obviously that would be a way of enhancing their data. And so COPAC's been around for 20 years. It's grown gradually over time. It's got more and more libraries contributing to the aggregation. And this is kind of historically how we've been thinking about COPAC and what we can do for libraries, how we aggregate this data. We've been sort of thinking very closely about, okay, let's pull in one library at a time and try and build up these numbers. And this, as of earlier this year, this was kind of the number that there was. I put 83 there in the middle in terms of numbers of contributing libraries. That's around about right, but some libraries actually give or contribute more than one data set, so it's a bit difficult to get a precise number. But essentially, COPAC was set up originally by RLUK, or its predecessor, and so we work very closely with RLUK, and David Prosser is in the room, and we suck in that data, which forms the great bulk and the great majority of this aggregation. It's all the bigger research libraries in the UK. But we also augment that with data from non-HE and non-RLUK libraries, and as you see, the data flows in particular ways. We convert all of the data into Mark 21 format. Most of that, or a good portion of that, goes into a Mark 21 record database, and you can download records, cataloging records from that database. If you're an RLUK member, you can do that for free. Others have to pay at the moment, although we do, we're working with RLUK, and we do want to open that up. And this is quite sort of big news for us. We want to try and be as open as we possibly can. The whole kind of our current ethos and what we want to do in the next few years is to be much more open and try and open things up as much as possible. And so that sort of records retrieval database and the COPAC collections management tools, which is a service layer which is built on top of COPAC, we want to open that up as well. But in terms of how to grow this, these are, I don't know how many there are, 10 or so institutions that are kind of lined up. We've always had a queue of institutions that want to contribute to this aggregation, but there's a big bottleneck in terms of the staff that we've got, how we can process and ingest that data. And so some of these are very interesting. The types of organisations listed here, we've got the Scottish Ornithologists Club down the bottom. I bet they've got some interesting books. And that's been the kind of piece up until now. We want to try and bring in interesting research collections to this aggregation. And in fact, I think I think yesterday the COPAC team announced that they brought the Scottish ornithologists on board. Hooray! But this, I mean, it's been good. It has its users, it has its supporters, COPAC, and there are people who like its interface, like its kind of its approach. But nonetheless, as I said, it's not really scalable, and we've recently been looking very hard and have asked some consultants to do some work around strategic implications. So I will get onto that, but I need to go on to the next kind of section of this, really. So I guess that was all kind of current landscape. That's, looking at how things are set up, what Jisc has been kind of focused on. But let's have a look at meeting user access needs now. So we've been, as well as working with these consultants, to think through the implications of strategy. They've been doing some survey work as well. So I just wanted to show you some information from, firstly, a library staff survey, and then a user survey, and see how the two of those kind of stack up against each other. So I'll put this up just before I go to the next slide, which is kind of going to be a bit data heavy and tabular, just to get your eye in, if you like. The purple is high use, 30 plus libraries. The green is medium use and yellow is low use. So you won't be able to see these numbers probably, but so this is the kind of information that we've been looking at recently, and it's on the left-hand side you see what's the activity, what's the workflow. The top line is finding a specific monograph, and so looking across these kind of services, how many libraries altogether? 80 libraries responded. So if 72, did I say 72? 72 of them are saying that their users rely on the LMS, that's the library management system, ILS in US parlance, to do this job, then it's interesting. And of course, at Jisc we have our eyes on the COPAC column there, so wondering how it stacks up against some of these systems. Not too badly, actually, according to this. This is according to librarians, remember, and librarians in the UK, many of them are quite fond of COPAC. And we've got stats there for WorldCat and others. So, there are ways of picking through this, and there are some services, obviously, that they've got no kind of business trying to satisfy needs in these areas, so they're understandably low. So is this available? Not yet. I don't think this is online yet, this study, but when it is, we'll announce it. So anyway, not to go any further into these kind of figures, but just to say that's a kind of view from the librarian side of things. This is even more kind of a dazzling table. So this is from 2015. So this is very recent. This is another point I should make. This is bang up to date, this data I'm showing you. So yeah, some of these things are interesting on this table, and this is asking users. I think this was about 4,000 responses to this survey, and I think almost 3,000 full responses. And this is from across 7 UK HEIs, 7 UK universities, basically. So it's quite big. I think we can probably take this data fairly seriously. And so these figures, 5 represents, they say that they always use something, a resource. And 1 would mean that they never used it. So that's the kind of scale we're working on here. So obviously, for first-year students, and it's broken down here by year of student or it's cut off slightly there. That's postdocs, PhD candidates, academics. Is that other institutional staff, I think? I don't remember what the last one is. Oh, it's just other. Yeah. And so So some of these things, again, you can kind of pick through these tables and get some interesting information. One thing that sticks out for me, unfortunately, is this column here. This is talking about the use of union catalogs, including COPAC. And this is if you imagine this is a heat map, so red denotes a kind of problem, if you like, or a lack of use. And this means more than half of those surveyed had never even heard of these union catalogs. I think another table in this report, which is actually available, you can have a look at it down here. There's a link there if you can get hold of these slides afterwards. So elsewhere, there was 3/4 of those surveyed said that they may have heard of it, but they never used union catalogs such as COPAC. This is across all of these categories of user. So this is quite interesting about this notion of digital natives versus digital immigrants that we were kind of hearing about a few years ago, which I think we've moved on from a little bit, but it certainly doesn't seem to. This certainly doesn't seem to bear it out in terms of it's fairly kind of regular across all of these user groups in terms of how they're using these resources. And what these postdocs? What's going on with them? I wonder. They're kind of funny little anomalies going on with them. You see that they don't really use these resources like everybody else does, except this one over here, which is Flickr and YouTube. And the other thing is these academics as well. So that's the highest figure in the whole table, 4.7. All of these academics, particularly from the humanities and from the social sciences, spend all their time on Flickr and YouTube. Yes, well, more dubious data, perhaps. Anyway, so there's things we can learn from these two different approaches to surveying, from, as I say, from the library staff side and then from the actual user side. And this is, I think this fellow called Ian Chowcat from Zero Consulting has kind of put this sort of analysis together based on these two surveys. And this is just kind of to summarize the differences between what we're hearing from what librarians say and what users say. And there are some quite significant differences here, particularly perhaps here with the union catalogs, where these figures in brackets exclude WorldCat, I think the note says in the table. But anyway, so staff are saying that they think 49% of users are using these union catalogs, but only 7% of users are saying that they're using them. So these are pretty kind of harsh figures in a way for a service provider like Jisc that has put some investment into these kinds of services. And I don't think we're not fooling ourselves that the services that we're running are being picked up by end users in the formats that we're putting them out there anymore. And I think we have to be realistic about this and be realistic about the impact, the wider impact that we're making. Okay, so and this is Ian's sort of text summary, if you like, of some of these things that they work through with not only with looking at these surveys, but also on a kind of scan on a very. He and Ciro did a look through some of the literature in 2013, and what they've just done is they've updated that. They've gone through the kind of literature again and done some analysis on it and brought out some trends from the kind of material and the resources that they've been reading about in the discovery area. And so these are some of the conclusions they've come to. The one I mentioned earlier about activity being pervasive across all categories of user and age ranges. There's growing voices about, or some voices, about challenging the idea that libraries should aim to play a primary role in discovery at all. We could doubtless talk about that a lot. So this idea about access from mobile devices, what's the point I've just been making about libraries overestimating the extent to which users oh, that wasn't the point I was making. This is a slightly different point. This idea that librarians, library staff overestimate how much users understand, and the terms that are used perhaps don't make as much sense to users coming into libraries, or even who've been within institutions with libraries for some time. Perhaps we need to work on that a little bit more and think very carefully about how we're actually putting these, marketing and putting these services across. But there is a developing focus on understanding what library and alternative discovery tools each do well. And I think this is what we talked a little bit about this yesterday, about mixing and matching services and kind of realizing, particularly what Marshall was talking about in terms of decoupling discovery service from its from the library management service, if that's helpful for an institution and whether we can facilitate that. Oops. Press, yes, right, okay, so that was the sort of second section, if you like. That was a kind of thinking about the sort of work that we've commissioned recently to try and get a better handle on what users are really thinking, what they really need, what the current kind of situation is. So I'll sort of round it off now with thinking about what's next and how we go forward. And so what I've been trying to do the last year or so, I've been head of resource discovery now for about 18 months or so, and over that time, user issues aside, what I have mostly been doing is talking to librarians and trying to work out ways forward from their point of view. And so I convened a group called the Jisc Bibliographic Data Roadmap Group. I met a couple of times and had some very useful discussions. And this takes us rather wider than resource discovery, so apologies for sort of straying off the remit of this event perhaps a little bit, but I think in terms of what Jisc wants to do on behalf of the sector, I think it's important to kind of place discovery in a sort of wider framework of action. And so I've put this list up, a very long list. It's kind of roughly-ish in sort of priority order of the kind of issues that the issues that were surfaced by these conversations I was having with some librarians, quite expert librarians, people from institutions in the UK who are quite forward-thinking, want to see the next phase of work and steer the next phase of work. And you'll see at the top that really for librarians and for the managers within institutions who are looking towards the library, it's really the management of the print legacy and how to do collections management in order to manage the space more effectively that is kind of taking the primary slot, if you like, or that has the most attention, the most focus. And so this is why we are sort of pushing more in the direction of using or kind of stepping back slightly from the provision of Jisc resource discovery services and more thinking much more about how we can support collections management within UK libraries. That's not to say that we are completely stepping away from the resource discovery, but it's about focus and primary and secondary focuses. So as we go down this list, you'll see that there's discovery of digital surrogates, and there's work that we need to do around that as well. Can I say much more? There's obviously data quality is up there as a sort of focus for what we should be looking into, as I said earlier. Okay. So this I mentioned that we had these consultants do this implications study for us, and this is just to sort of put it up on screen and make it clear how that's steering what we're going to be doing over the next couple of years. And so the recommendation there is that resource discovery, as I said just now, should not be a first-order consideration in determining the value of COPAC going forward. And we should be refocusing on collections management. Third one is around about the principle that metadata records should be openly licensed under CC0. I'm very interested in this one. I'm very interested in how we actually step through that. And I hear different things from different people. I talked about it on our table a bit yesterday, actually, during the discussion session, about what kind of a problem is this? Just for metadata records to be open? Surely that's in everyone's interests to put out metadata that's going to make things more discoverable. It's in publishers' interests. It's in aggregators' interests. However, of course, if some people are putting more effort into making their data high quality, then obviously they're going to feel rather aggrieved if everyone else is taking advantage of the effort that they're putting in. So we just need to work through, and I think we need to sort of push it and see where the barriers are that we bump up against. And if there are people, if there are parties, if there are interested parties who want to talk about brokering agreements, then I think that's where Jisc can help. We can, on behalf of the sector, we can sit down with people and say, okay, we acknowledge that you've put effort into this data. Let's see what we can do to smooth the path towards openness. And now to introduce this idea of the monobase, it should be feasible to run a monobase procurement competition. Now, what have I got next? I can't remember. Yes. So I don't know if people are familiar with this piece of work that Jisc kind of led on a year or two back, the National Monograph Strategy. This was a kind of a lengthy process where we wanted to sort of focus very much on the monograph, the book length result of research, because that was felt at the time to be in need of some strategy to be wrapped around it. There was talk of a monographs crisis. I think that's kind of receded a little bit now. I don't think anybody thinks that the monograph is going away. Even the print monograph is going away anytime soon. There are too many disciplines that are still still rely on this form of publication. But there was a lot of thinking done about how to take the next step with monographs. It's not that journals are a solved problem. It's just that there's been a great deal of focus on journals over the years, and so now's the time for sort of books to step into the limelight and for us to really kind of work out how to manage them, what to do with them. And the recommendations from the National Monograph Strategy, there was 7 of them or so. You probably can't see them, but one of the principal one was, it talked about what we need is a national knowledge base, a national monograph knowledge base, or a monobase for short. And what it talks about in this NMS roadmap is that this monobase should be the largest, most open aggregation of data possible, and that should be bibliographic and holdings data, that should be usage data, that should be maybe citation data if possible, might be kind of management subscription data. It's ambitious. It's a very big kind of systems integration piece, and it requires scale. So this is what I'm talking about when I'm referring to a monobase. There were other recommendations, and particularly the digitization strategy. It called for a national digitization strategy, and we're thinking now that's not quite right. In fact, that's not really right at all. We shouldn't really be thinking in terms of how to enable institutions to do a great deal of digitization. We should be really thinking more in terms about digital access and taking advantage of all of the resources that are available already that have been digitized. We've been talking a little bit to the Hattie Trust, trying to work out whether there are possibilities for the UK to take advantage of their enormous collections. There are other collections as well, of course. And it's about trying to think through what the problems are, cross-border rights issues, and how we enable UK institutions to get what they want that's existing out there. It's quite a hard problem, but anyway, it's not a national digitization strategy. It's something else I think we need there. And there are other things like shared publishing platforms, which we're also going to be looking at, and other things they talked about, like a systemic changes think tank. I don't even know what that is, so we're not bothering with that. Okay, so in terms of the next few years of Jisc focus and energy and investment, so it's kind of going to be three things that kind of just trying to sort of boil down that national monograph strategy, and also the all of the kind of thoughts and discussions we had within the earlier bibliographic data roadmap group as well. And we've been talking to RLUK, and we've been talking to SCONL, who's the other library membership organisation in the UK. RLUK represent the research libraries, SCONL represent a broader swathe of libraries, and so Jisc is very focused on working with those two organisations in this area to kind of make progress over the next couple of years. So one strand is going to be thinking through this monobase and thinking through, I think, over the next 6 to 9 months, just thinking very carefully about the specification and what exactly is possible with this monobase. Is it a procurement process? It probably is a bit of that. I think there's a lot of quid pro quo that needs to go on there as well in terms of the value that we're already bringing, that Jisc and the sector is bringing to aggregating data, and how that might benefit discovery service providers. So anyway, there's some kind of process there of working out exactly what this monobase can be, over what period and what phases it might be built, and what sort of investment will be required. So there'll be a kind of business plan that will be required over the next 6 to 9 months for the next phase of investment at Jisc as well, looking to sort of start building, procuring, or systems integration from, say, August 16 onwards. There's this digital access piece, which I talked a little bit about. That's around licensing and rights and permissions, and there's a lot of quite complex, gritty work that can be done there. And I think with hooking up with the Copyright Licensing Agency and the Publishers Licensing Society, PLS? No, can't remember. Anyway, working with collections agencies and licensing agencies to try and smooth through, and just kind of think through ideas like a copyright exchange, which is a concept that's been talked about in the UK recently. And where do you go to actually get definitive information about who owns this resource? The CLA currently have the biggest database of that type in the UK. So clearly we need to go and talk to them and work with them and around all these rights issues. And then the third one, which colleagues in Jisc are taking forward rather than myself, is thinking about open access publishing, publishing platforms, shared publishing platforms, the whole kind of university press, academic presses, and how that's changing, and whether there are shared services and shared opportunities there. And as far as I'm concerned, in terms, because I'm mostly focused on the kind of data side of things and how we organize and orchestrate the data, what we can do as models are changing and as perhaps OA publishing gets more embedded and there's more capability there, then what do we do with the data at the point of creation in order to make sure that perhaps we start feeding that data into a linked data world, or open linked data, and start going in that direction, start pushing, start building up capacity and capability in those forms of metadata and metadata linking right from the point of creation. So we sort of build going forwards. So we don't worry too much about having to cope with the vast amount of data behind us, but we can at least start building for the future as we go forwards with new publishing. Okay, I'm nearly done. Okay, so this just goes into a little bit more detail about the uses of a monobase. It's to help libraries rationalize print stock. It's about being open. I think this is on the right-hand side is the kind of summary of these points about what the monobase might actually kind of support. And I guess just to try and sort of make it easier and to summarize some simple-ish objectives, so that seems to me that we should be doing, that Jisc should be doing, and we should be working with the sector on, and our strategic partners, is to essentially, we can't get away from the fact that we do need a larger aggregation of library data, and that's something that we want to try and work on fairly immediately, try and, although COPAC as a resource discovery kind of function, we're focusing less on that. We still have the COPAC team and the makings of that aggregation there that we can build on. We can feed that into the monobase. And we want to make data flow as freely, as openly as possible, as I've said. And we want to help libraries to manage their collections better. I'm almost done. This is just a sort of visual representation of the strategy, if you like. It's data right at the center of things. It's rather than picking through tiny bits of data and how it flows between different organizations or what the rights are associated with that data. It's just putting data at the center and trying to push it out in all directions where it's going to be useful and where it's going to be discoverable, and how to get that library data working as hard as it possibly can in order to bring users back to the library via some magical loop-back function that we have yet to devise properly. And working with the discovery vendors down the bottom there, I think we have to be very much more open than perhaps Jisc has been in the past to having those conversations and making the data flow in the right way. So there is, in fact, one more slide, isn't there? Yes. Okay, these last two slides will go very quickly. We're not in the business of competing with resource discovery services, even if we could, bearing in mind what I said about the enormous complexity and the investment that it takes to do these discovery indexes. We all know that academic libraries want to demonstrate their value and their interest in discoverability. I think this is important. Librarians care about data quality. I think this is possibly the issue that libraries can continue to contribute most to. This is one of the great qualities of library and those that work in them, is that they actually care about this stuff. Open license data again, and we have the bulk of the data. We need to chase the long tail. I think this is an important point that we have to bear in mind. There's a law of diminishing returns, but nonetheless we have to go down that long tail and find this data in order to do effective collections management. And this is the last slide, just because I thought we'd better bring it back to discovery right at the end here, because that's what we're here for, talking about. These are on top of all this survey work and that CIRO have done for us. This is a kind of summary of where we think the emerging trends are for discovery. And I think we've talked about most of these things already. This one down here, the hidden economy of user-curated scholarly discovery, is perhaps something that we didn't touch upon very much yesterday, and I think is interesting. What murky world there is of people sharing things, possibly slightly illegally, and how important that is, and how effective that is about getting stuff to people. It's an interesting question. Okay, and very lastly, let's talk about the next generation and their expectations. This quote here, ruthlessly instrumental approach to search. I think that's the younger generation, our kids, my kids, not really understanding any of this stuff and just wanting to get to the right place and get to the right thing. And we must help them with that. Thank you ever so much.
Great. We have some time for questions. Here. Sorry.
I was just wondering if that report was going to become publicly available.
Yes. So the student one is. That was done by Innovative and CIRO Consulting. That's available. So the library staff one, it's part of a piece of work. Is this on? It's part of a piece of work, a sort of second piece of work that we've commissioned. We looked at the implications of discovery strategies, and we're also doing a piece right now that's due to report at the end of this month on the library support services within Jisc and their overlaps and how the data flows. And that survey was done as part of that than the one I commissioned. So it should be, I think it should be possible to release the report sort of mid-November, I would think.
In your long list of the concerns, the last one is consuming the data and from the end user perspective. Could you talk more about that?
Consuming the data from the, oops, why this isn't working again. So I think this is possibly around the kind of discovery to delivery aspect, and actually getting to the item itself, and so being able to consume it, and the barriers that are in the way. And we've got sort of, within Copac, if you see a record, it'll say, there's these many print copies and these many online copies. You click on that function to try and think you'll be getting through to the actual piece, but you very rarely will. You'll get to a publisher website, you'll get to an authorization. So I guess it's thinking, how do we, and it's all part of this digital access piece as well, how do we integrate the metadata aggregation with the most persistent and the highest quality available copy that's available globally? How do we push users in the direction of actually being able to consume the item, which we're not doing very effectively at the moment?
Hi. You talked a lot about print resources, and sort of here at the end have mentioned streaming services. But there's a reason why your humanities people are spending all their time on Flickr and YouTube. So can you talk a little bit about non-print resources?
Well, certainly for the purposes of the monobase, the idea is that it will be print and digital, that we're sort of focused equally on trying to guide people to those resources. In terms of, I don't know, the relative focus of different disciplines. I mean, you mentioned the humanities, and yeah, my sense is that things are going to move a lot more slowly than perhaps we thought they would in terms of the focus of who uses what, and whether it's digital or whether it's print, and perhaps the kind of plateauing of e-books to, well, it was about 20% or something, that suddenly seems to have sort of flattened out a little bit over the last few years. And maybe that's quite interesting in terms of how comfortable people are about embracing kind of digital formats. I think it can only, I mean, I don't know, it's peering into the future. I mean, maybe these things, they go plateau and then they rise against, depending on, technology implementations. And I think if streaming services, music streaming services, obviously, I guess we probably all use them these days. If we can start looking at that technology, and much like we were talking about, looking at consumer and retail sites and how that might influence libraries, if we can start bringing that over into, streaming of humanities resources. I think there's a technological challenge there, and just need to think that through. I don't know, not a very good answer, but.
Thanks. Well, I think that is a significant problem that we haven't really addressed in the UK. So one of the services that Jisc runs is Archives Hub, which is a very good service for allowing people to discover material within special collections. And not all special collections are in there, but there's certainly at the moment, and Neil can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's any linkage between the work that's going on with monographs and the work that goes on with special collections and archives. So you can't search across all of those simultaneously. And that's, as I say, that's something that I don't think we've got very far in our thinking in the UK on. And I think one of the reasons that we're both here is to try and get inspiration and some new thinking about those types of issues.
Yeah, I think that's right, actually, David. And, I mean, I sort of flashed up that the Archives Hub was one of our services. The Archives Hub at the moment is slightly reinventing itself, putting itself on a new technical platform, and that's kind of where its focus of activity is at the moment. But I think when that's done, and maybe a year or two down the line, then it will be a good moment once again to think very much what David's just said about how to integrate these services, how to bring special collections a little bit more firmly into scope. There was some work done back in 2010, 2011 between COBAC and the Archives Hub, and that was a linked data project. It was called LOCA. And so that was some kind of pilot work to try and see how linked data might bridge the gap, if you like. It was very resource intensive, and we haven't had time or resource to go back and follow that up, but I think that would be part of work going forward as well.
So when you talk about the monobase, it looks like it's doing a lot, and that have you considered like a fully shared back-end system for all the libraries instead of that? Because this is additive on top of the existing infrastructure and cost and effort and all of that, and kind of following the model of the Wealth Group and others, are you considering more a unified resource management system across the UK, England, in addition to the group in Wales?
We will be considering it from all angles over this kind of next period, 6 to 9 months of sitting down with strategic partners and working through exactly what this specification is. The NMS roadmap came up with this idea of the monobase, and that was about it. And so you look at a roadmap and you think, actually, what are the actionable steps here, and what does it actually mean? What is this investment? And your idea just then, and talking to David last night, one of his board members was saying, okay, well, really, do we need to have this monobase, this monster base, as I'm starting to call it? Perhaps it's we can just federate searches. So I think it's all up for grabs. I think you're right to question some of the kind of fundamental assumptions that are starting to emerge about this monobase.
It's very complex and involved back-end LMS systems, and this is a layer on top of that, and harvesting and replicating data and workflows and all of that.
Yeah,
And and adding money, not saving money.
Yeah.
Is the argument that somebody
There is a sense that within Jisc, we tied into certain kind of database platforms, perhaps unhelpfully, and that kind of another instance elsewhere, perhaps a procured instance or run for us by somebody else, starts giving many more options.
Okay, well, if there are any more questions, we can maybe address them in the break. We're running a couple minutes long, but thank you very much. So we've got a 15-minute break before we start up with the next roundtable discussions. Nettie, how are we doing on the survey? Okay, so we have a new bit.ly address. So those of you on the live stream, again, it's bit.ly/NISO Horizon, all one word, all lowercase. Yes? Nettie's furiously typing away. Yes. And we're also tweeting it. So just as we did yesterday, go to that URL and vote on which topic is of greatest interest to you. Can we get that pulled up? We have, okay, so I'm just going to read these off as much as I can. Okay, so Horizon issue number 1 is user interfaces, so kind of user design. Personalization, so as well as a kind of avoiding the echo chamber, so the tension between personalization and say you've got personalized search, but that doesn't kind of limit serendipity. Can libraries remain relevant to our patrons with Google Scholar / Mendeley, et cetera? The role of open educational resources and the library's relationship with that. Intelligent, flexible relevancy. That's what it says. Interoperability with ERMS web intranets. Understanding the motivations and shared responsibilities against the data ecosystem for improving metadata quality. So how do we encourage better metadata? And then non-text discovery, so video, visuals, geographics, etc. Or any other ideas. One thing I noticed about yesterday, there was a little confusion. Does anyone have any confusion about that list? I think maybe 5. It's, yeah, okay. Do you have? Yes, please.
What I mean by intelligent, flexible relevancy is using new approaches to relevancy ranking that are based not only on some sort of fixed assessment of the contents of the index as they go in, but also on what the user is doing with that content at any given time, what the result sets were, what they clicked on, where they are, and maybe some information about attributes, perhaps from Shibboleth, that sort of pulling in a lot of different information to have relevancy ranking that's responsive at the moment of the search.
Great. Any other ideas that aren't on that list before we break and kind of reconvene into those groups? I've just been focused a lot of time and attention on the questions of privacy. We have a group that's talking about those issues, but interesting that it didn't appear on the list. Anything else? I think we can certainly organize 8 tables. I think we managed to fit into 8 tables yesterday, so we don't necessarily need 10 topics. So with that, the survey's up. If you're on the line, please vote on them. And we'll keep that survey open for about 10 minutes. It's 1:15, so why don't we reconvene at 10:30? In about 15 minutes. Great. Thank you. All right, there we go. Okay. I was worried because what we do is we kill the mics for the live stream table. The voting is in, and user interfaces was the first one, was the group that had the overwhelming interest. So user interfaces is the table that will be live streamed. We'll talk to you all in a second about how to do that. So, to run down, we have user interfaces in the back. Table number 2, personalization. Great. Libraries being relevant, Google, Scholar, etc. Open educational resources seems to have lost out. Intelligent, flexible relevancy, that's table 5. There was a point raised that table 5 and table 2 were actually quite similar, but slightly different. Be interesting to hear like how you all take on that. Interoperability with ERMSs is table 6. Understanding motivations, shared responsibilities, table 7, there. And non-textual discovery. Great. I like this spread. We've actually got a really good collection of people. So, same instructions as we did yesterday. What we'd like you to do is talk about the issue itself. What are the critical components of that theme, that topic? And then what are potential, because we're talking about horizon issues here, how do we advance the conversation regarding that? And also, what potential role would NISO have in this? We're in this horizon issues, there might not necessarily be a specification, a project, a specific NISO working group that we would launch. But there's a variety of other things that NISO can do to help advance the conversation. We could organize a specific meeting, again, similar to this, on that topic. We could commission some research. We could undertake some consensus building on those issues, whatever that might be, to help advance the state of the art. So there's a lot of different things that NISO can do that is short of standards and best practices that can help advance some of these issues. So think creatively about what role NISO can play by bringing people together, by engaging the community and engaging the players in the community to help solve some of these issues. NISO does a lot more than just get working groups together and write standards. Education is another critical thing that we do. So with that in mind, we'll do this for about an hour, maybe a little bit more than an hour, give you guys an opportunity to get some real conversation going. And then similarly, if every table would pick a reporter and who can speak to the issues that you've discussed at the end. So we'll have about an hour of discussion and about 45 minutes of reporting. Any questions? No? Excellent. Great. And again, if you're on the live stream, we'll be focusing on this table. And we'll kill the mics in the room, but we'll pass the mics around that table. All right? Go forth. Thank you. Is this streaming out? Okay. So here's one mic. It seems sort of strange to be talking into a mic. I don't want to stop. Maybe what we can do is just go around the table and introduce yourselves so that the rest of the world knows who you are. And we've got a couple mics. So, just so that everyone knows, green is on. You push the bottom, it goes red. Okay.
Hello, everyone. My name's Farouk Sadiq. I'm a software engineer with Johns Hopkins.
Hi, my name's Scott. I'm with Valdosta State University.
My name is Dave Kennedy. I'm from Johns Hopkins University.
I'm Julie Zhu. I'm from IEEE, Discovery Service Relations Manager.
Hey, I am Shannon Lakai. I am with American Chemical Society.
I'm Karen McEwen from Gale Cengage, and I manage Discovery and Analytics.
I'm Carola Della Porta. I'm a librarian from the University of Milan in Italy.
Kathy O'Baggy from Project Muse.
Hi, I'm Jeannie Powell with Atlas Systems.
I'm Jonathan Greenberg from Realm.
Juliana Wood from NISO.
Margaret Burry, Johns Hopkins.
We have a very broad topic.
So I'll at least get us started. I picked this mostly because I was curious what everyone else would say. So I'm with Atlas Systems. We make Aeon for special collections, Ares for reserves, and Iliad for interlibrary loan. So obviously we deal with user interfaces. What's interesting is that we have not only our own user interface, but we have our integrations with other people's user interfaces and people trying to design their own and not really wanting to use what we have, but just wanting our stuff to kind of plug into it, where they want to do one-stop shopping kinds of things. And so I was curious what kind of one-stop shopping things people liked and stuff like that.
I guess my question is, I've looked at some discovery systems, and one of the things I was always told was use an F design. Start in the upper left-hand corner, the way the eye works. And one of the reasons I always saw that was because of the way our eyes work, and yet I'm seeing discovery tools putting so much of the information on the left-hand side for the search parameters to narrow the search down by content, by form, by year. When the original systems I saw put that over on the right-hand side, so the left-hand side could be devoted to those resources that you had returned initially, so that's where your eye would go immediately. And then how many clicks should you have to use to get to where you want to go? I've always been told the ideal website, you should never have more than 2 clicks from your home place to get to where you want to go, and then you click and click and click and click, and then sometimes another screen opens, sometimes it doesn't, then you think you're going back and actually you've left your search and you've got to start over. And when you say go back to search results, is it your initial search results or is it the search results that you've got after you've put some parameters in there like year, things like that? The use of colors. You know, I've always told don't use red. That for some people that causes some emotional issues. With different colors, different branding, different logos, how much screen reach, as I said, you only have so much landscape, so much resource space there. So those are some of the issues that I'm looking at. Do we want to, I don't say you want to create some standards so that everybody looks the same. They tried that with RDA and that didn't work. But do we want to make some suggestions? Do we want to look at some studies saying, we suggest that you move the return list to the upper left-hand corner and your parameters to the bottom or to the right, mobile as opposed to a desktop computer or a laptop or a landscape versus portrait? Those are some of the questions that I've got. Tap the bottom.
So I was just going to paraphrase what I think your question was is, do we want to create suggestions or do some studies that might help encourage better design or usability that we could all benefit from? That might be, I think you're suggesting
Please-
that might
please
be a
note he's
role.
shaking his head yes.
Okay, he's shaking his head, yes, noted, yeah. Is that, at Gale Cengage, I kind of can relate to some of the challenges of Atlas because we have, array of databases, and each one is kind of optimized for the content and the user. So there's lots of different principles that apply. It's hard to standardize a K-12 database versus a higher ed one. So sometimes, and then I think we have been converting everything to be mobile optimized, and so I think that's kind of changed a lot of the traditional look and feel of the databases, particularly some of the things you were talking about where the filters show up and things like that. So I think, I guess I'm curious to kind of frame the question too about, from a library standpoint, what is it that you would find beneficial? Is it something that you're looking to manage within in terms of creating, the right kind of interface, or is it something that you'd like, your partners, your discovery service to do a better job at? So I'll throw that question open.
From the library point of view, one big issue is to make a statement of you are on the library site and not on the vendor site. So how to integrate logos and other images that are specific for the library or the library system is important. And sometimes the institution work a lot on those things. Then the vendor change the interface and we lose everything or almost everything. Or in other cases, the vendor don't let the institution use much space for their own insignia, their own logos, and so on and so forth. So we are both interested on that, and also to make the interface as easy to use for the patrons. So that is also a big issue for a library.
We have something from the live stream. This is less a question and more a comment from John Dove. The big question, distinguishing known item searching from the right stuff you weren't looking for.
Unfortunately, I'm not sure that I understand what that means. So I'm trying to think if it's known item searching for the versus the results that you weren't looking for. So I guess it's, are you asking the right question to get the answer? Or is it, well, and Google does that, which is not necessarily about user interface so much as search magic, where when you search for things and then it tells you, I know that you typed in something that was completely wrong, but I'm going to magically tell you what you meant to ask instead, and manages to magically get that right. I don't know that that's necessarily a user interface thing. I mean, although I guess it could be. One of the things that I think I like most about Google in that aspect is that there's so little, like you were talking about the F and like, how do I know where to look for something? How do I know where the search is going to be? And it's one of those things that one of the things we did on our documentation pages was we radically redesigned them so that the search box is humongous and like right in the middle. And oh, by the way, you want a couple of other things, we're going to put those as big buttons across the bottom of the common things you want. And yes, you can go find this table of contents if you really are picking through it. But we found that 90% of the time people were wanting to come to the pages for this particular reason. And maybe that's in order to improve someone's user interface, we need to make sure that we have enough exercises of user testing and figuring out the best way of not waiting until you have gone to a mountaintop and designed a page and then show it to somebody, but throughout the process have people to look at this. And it's very similar to what we do from a development standpoint. We don't go and write a product for 2 years and then come back and you go, look what we made for you. What do you mean you don't like it? But at each point through the process saying, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? And getting that feedback of well, 5 out of 7 people said they couldn't find what they were looking for. And we think they're all crazy, but apparently these are our users, so we're going to have to figure out a way to make it better.
Really quick, if I can. To refine on what the question was, because Jeannie, you had a question about that. This was actually in reference to yesterday's presentation about serendipitous discovery and how it relates to the topic of this table, which unfortunately I missed. So someone might want to repeat that for the live stream.
Well, okay, so then my interpretation of that then is from the serendipitous, hard to say, serendipitous discovery of when you search for something and then you're going to get a wide variety of type of results. That is part of the user interface of here's what are the basic things, classic, and I can't remember a couple other things that he said. And then there was literally the serendipity thing at the bottom of maybe you meant this, the I'm feeling lucky kind of interface. So that is kind of cool to make sure that you can make opportunities to have that kind of information in your user interface, clearly labeled.
I think going along with that is one of the changes when I was in a situation, we had a special collection, and the person in charge of the special collection was always adamant saying, it doesn't say on the screen that this is a special collection item, that this has got its unique characteristics. So we said, this has the display. And then the people in the AV department said, well, we have to have this display, and and eventually you run out of screen display. Everybody wants short, brief screen displays for that first result, but then they all have to have their piece of information, so you've got to make those choices because there's a limited amount of screen display. And one example I saw, which really made me start thinking, was so many times when you look at that first search box, you have to say, I want books, or I want journals, or I want A to Z, whatever that may be, or I want AV materials. What I saw one system do is they did, as Jeannie said, one big box that says find. And then when it returns the results, there are multiple tabs at the top that said books in the library collection, online journals, scholarly journals, items in the AV collection. So it returned everything, but pre-sorted for the user. The user could say, yes, I want to go in this direction, rather than the user having to figure out what they want beforehand and then having to wade through amounts of items. On the other hand, I understand for known item searching, you would want to say, I want a book. But I know personally when I'm searching the internet, I'm looking for a particular music video, and how hard it is for me to find it, because even though I type in the song and it gets completed, I never quite seem to be able to get to the version I want. And I have to put in a lot of very specific characteristics for that video, that performer, that location, and some other information. So I don't have an answer, but I do like the idea when I saw that the system just had find everything, and then it kind of had these tabs at the top where you could select the different physical locations, the different genres, or the different directions you wanted to go. And I like that. It seemed to make more sense than having to figure out beforehand what I wanted, where I could just say, yeah, find this in a Google type environment, or I'm sorry, a Bing type environment. And then once it returns results, then I can proactively narrow my search down.
Other issue with the user interface are the mobile devices. And although all the vendors say that, okay, our interface adapt to the mobile, is not really true. They must be rethought in order to fit to the screen of a mobile, especially a phone. Also because people using those kind of device cannot scroll forever in order to reach, I don't know, the facet to filter the search or through result, because the device is so tiny, and really the interface must be redesigned for that specific use.
I did have a question on what Scott was talking about. upstream of like even being able to do the big broad topic search, do you find there's a need, particularly for students, to have something that help sort of form their search? We play around with like topic finders and things like that that help students kind of narrow. They start with a very broad topic for a research paper and it's not, you know, specific enough. So do you find that there's a need for that kind of thing in a, you know, while we're talking about a search interface?
I've seen, at least in our library, is, you know, like many libraries, we've got LibGuides. And in that environment, who's ever created the LibGuide has selected maybe 5 or 6 potential databases that take the user directly to that, which is very good when it's structured around a specific course, around a specific topic. But then again, it really reduces that serendipitous, that area where those things that you might see on the screen are getting missed. When I do consultations with students, very often they haven't formed a very specific topic. They're still very much trying to formulate their topic, and of course, very often with undergraduates, they'll say, "Well, I'll do a paper on where I can get a lot of information very easily," because they don't want to spend time doing the research. But then when I'm working with them, when we get the first set of results, invariably the audience that come to the first 5 or 6 results are just so esoteric, they're not what they're looking for. But as we go further down, then all of a sudden they see a couple topics like, ooh, that paper looks interesting. So they click on that, and that starts formulating their search. That serendipitous browsing is very important for them. So we think we're doing a good job by having those LibGuides to take them to specific sources, but then those specific sources are so specific, they're missing some of that stuff that helps them formulate their topic better. So it's one of those, I want the computer to return what I want, but not what I want all the time.
Well, and I think that there's a challenge of available real estate and psychic computers. So, you know, Google has just nothing but one big box, but they've put a lot of effort into being psychic and knowing what you're trying to ask about. And I think that the average library or research page that I go to is the exact opposite of that, where it's like almost like we've had a table like this and everyone has to name the thing that has to be on the page. And so we end up with 15 things going down the side menu, and then no one can decide what order to be in. So to be fair, we'll put them alphabetical or whatever the case may be. And then we're trying to be fair, or we're trying to be all things to all people, and you can't do that. And then it's that there's a fantastic XKCD cartoon where it says like, what I'm trying to find, this is a Venn diagram of like what I'm trying to find when I go to the university website, your address, like how to get there. And then it's like what I find when I go to a university website of like success stories from your students. And it's like, no, stop it. Like trying to make sure that we know what people actually are looking for so that we can best put that up there with the least amount of clicks and hurdles. Easier said than done.
We have something from the live stream here. Actually, it's a 2-part comment. Can you hold this for me while I scroll? Thank you. Let's see here. So we have the first part of the comment is proprietary discovery systems often don't disclose how the relevancy ranking works, and then it makes it very difficult to have confidence in the predictability of results. There needs to be a plea for openness.
I think one of the and that's a very good point that they don't disclose how they do those relevancy rankings because that's very proprietary. Each vendor has designed a product that they feel is the best, and they're not. Yes, I know we want openness, but then that's what they feel is a competitive advantage to how they prioritize those items in the relevancy rankings. And I don't think you're going to get that openness that you want because this is how they try and differentiate themselves in the marketplace.
And then in reality, people go back. So, it's a success, and people go back to Google and they use that service. So it doesn't matter whether we would like it to be open, but it's working for them. So what we also need to understand is that users we are all being trained to use these user interfaces. We go to Google and we expect, other services to work like Google. We expect things to be simple when we start off, or our users expect that. And then we learn how to use those services and refine our searches depending on what comes back as we get more information. So in fact, I think there is some value in being followers here and learning from, the software industry has always done this. What does Apple do? What does Amazon do? What do Google do? Why are they getting it right? Can we follow them? Are we providing too much information on our first pages? I think that's true. And what are we losing by, following those models? These are all difficult questions, to answer.
Actually, I'm gonna add like a couple user and comments on this. As a trainee from my previous life, I'm an organic chemist. I get my PhD in organic chemistry, and I did a lot of research. And with a lot of data we saw like yesterday and today, and I use Google very frequently. The reason is that search is very simple, and the result get very relevant and visual. And when I was doing like the library research, is nothing wrong with the results I am getting, but the result I was getting, it was very confusing and very large amount of data. Actually, you need an additional effort. You need an additional effort to look at that data and analyze it, and additional filters. As a user, any single effect you are taking on that page, basically you are losing the conversion or losing the user. I think Google is doing great to understand who is the user and provide that relevant results on the first page. And again, if you look at the Google, your first page result only 10 items. It's not anything like that longer than that. And so rarely you go to second or third page. I think like as an interface, I would like to see a similar function that result come quite relevant to you and is a very concise way, like the more result. We like the variety, but too many is gonna be confused user.
And I think one thing it's really important to think about is, we're talking about user interface, but we have a wide range of users. So, for example, when we do instruction with undergraduates, we almost always incorporate and start with Google Scholar and explain how to most effectively use it. We make, how do you have our link resolver in there to lead them to what they need to know? And then we'll focus on one or two specialized databases. And we actually have a user experience director, so we're really fortunate in that area. And a lot of the work that we've done when we have done interviews with graduate students and faculty, asking them to explain to us how they do their research, they seem to know, probably having learned a long time ago, what of the very specific databases work for them. And so they'll do a combination of Google Scholar and, in chemistry, some of the structure databases. And that's fine, and they're getting what they want. And I know we worry a little bit about, well, what if the user doesn't find exactly what they need? But our undergraduates are moving through in 4 years. Many of them are not going to have access to that material, to those databases after they leave, nor are they going to be doing heavy-duty research. So it's just really important when we think about user interface to think about this wide range of users that we're dealing with.
And I think one of the things that's with Google is there's very much a halo effect. It's the first thing they encounter, it's the first thing they use, and everything will be judged by those standards. Even though later on they realize, wow, I'm not getting what I want. Wow, I have to go to that third or fourth screen. Wow, it's there on top because that organization is paying to have the results put up there, or because other people are looking for it, but that's not what I'm looking for. And when I've done library instruction classes, I always take the students to a site called Bing It On and make them do side-by-side comparisons of Bing and Google. And invariably, the students 9 times out of 10 pick Bing. They like the results they get. But I ask them, are you going to use that? No. Why? because I use Google. It's just become a mindset, and it's one of those, the old classic. It may not be better, it may not be a good product, it may not be very efficient, but it's the first one that was out there, and they've convinced people that it's the best one, even if it's not, even if objectively you show people it's not, even if objectively you show a student they can get more of what they want, specifically with a library search interface and search site. They're always going to go back to Google because they've been convinced through marketing, like FedEx, it absolutely positively has to be there overnight. Google will absolutely positively give you what you want, even though it may not be what you want. You've been convinced it's what you want.
We're talking about a little bit about different types of users, and I want to bring up librarians as users as well, and perhaps faculty or sort of more advanced users. How prominent? What's the role of the sort of advanced search screen or advanced search features? How prominently should those appear on a landing page? How far should you have to go? How far should you have to look to find a screen that gives you lots and lots of options for a really targeted search? I mean, we're all talking about, it's great to have the one box, Google-like screen, but there are certainly lots of users who don't want that, who want something else, and there's obviously some compromises to make as far as how prominent you make those advanced features or how far you hide them.
I agree with you. We librarian search in a different way. When I do my search, I never go to the discovery tool. I go exactly to the database that I know I need. But as the previous speech showed, librarian and user are a totally different world. And so the thing is that we have to be aware when we test this interface that we are a different world. So those slides were really interesting for this different approach. And also we often have a feeling that the students or the faculty might need something, but actually it's our feeling, our view, and so that's we have to keep that really looking at that very carefully, because otherwise we would want everybody to be a librarian, and we know that that's not the case.
But librarians are nonetheless important users. I mean, even if they're doing a very small percentage of the searches, they're doing those searches very often for patrons, for users. And the success of a product is going to be, in no small part, determined by how well librarians can interact with the software.
So knowing that the use cases are quite different, how would you advise either a discovery service or a provider to try to engineer the interface so that it can accommodate that range?
Actually, I do have one comment on that one. For example, both search engines or like the library search engines result as a single page. What about like the splitting the page with the both search engine results and also library results? In that way, user could see like the comparison both and can easily select one of them. That would be one solution for that problem, and brings the both user and the librarian on the same platform. Yeah.
When I'm doing instruction, the two things I hear from the students the most, and I know this is because it's coming from their instructor, is I want full text. I don't want to see a result on my screen unless I know I can sit here and read it on my screen. I don't want to have to interlibrary loan it. I don't want to have to go to the shelf and get it. Basically, I'm lazy. Number two, I want scholarly journals only. And this is coming from the instructor. If there were only 2 buttons that were on a search result list, that aside from an advanced search, I mean, I know language is a big one, and for another one, if I had to pick a third, it would be year of publication. I want the results ordered in the most current one first. That's coming from the instructors. But I want full text, I want scholarly, because I'm lazy. And as somebody said, what's the goal of a college student? Get good grades, don't work hard. That pretty much sums up the college student goal. Well, that and get free food, but so I think that those 2 things, you know, as somebody who works in the reference desk on a regular basis, and then when I work with the professors, their goal, they're looking for the most recent publications, particularly in their field. They want to know what's the most current research in my topic, not the most relevant, the most current, because I, as an intelligent professor, will make the decision whether it's relevant to me or not. I just want to know what's new because I check the new research on a regular basis. Now, I know special libraries, publics may have a different viewpoint, but that's what I see working on the reference desk.
But I think that is very much subject-based, because I work in a humanities library, and in our fields, it's not always the case that they want the most recent things. I'll give you an example in archaeology. In archaeology, you dig, and you might find, all of a sudden, like, let's say, a statue. And what you need is to identify that statue. So you don't need to have all the finding, like last year finding. You need to identify that statue that might have like a copy that been dug 100 years ago. So it's not always the case that you need like the most current research. You need the research that it's more useful to you.
This from the live stream from Virginia. What I hear in this is that maybe what we need are ways to customize interfaces for different users.
And that's a very, I think you went to that direction because that's where I was going. Then that brings up the topic where I've seen this. You could spend so much time customizing what you've got, and nobody's ever going to be happy. But if there are, you know, eventually you can spend so much time customizing that you don't actually spend time doing your other tasks. I don't think most libraries have the luxury of having a full-time discovery tool web designer. I know we don't. And perhaps, I don't know, if, you know, we told the discovery vendors, do some studies, do some research, or NISO could do some studies, do some research. What are the top 5 configurations that users are looking for? What are configurations out there are the most often, the most prevalent? And then make those as possible canned out of the box, where when you set up your system, you could say, here are 5 options. Which do you think you want? Or maybe a drop and drag type environment.
I think that would have to be pretty much or very regularly updated, those kinds of things. Because as we know, you know, the web is constantly evolving, and what are best practices now, or what, I mean, I think about things like icons. Even icons change, and like what icon you used to mean share, or what icon you used to mean download could change from one year to the other. And so all of this would need to be, if there were any kind of recommendations or best practices or anything, it would need to be updated, you know, I would say yearly, for it to really have any, for it to work.
Well, we tell the vendors to do that.
And I'd like to say that we don't need to reinvent the wheel when we look at our user interfaces. I mean, there are frameworks out there that we can use that are open source, and we do use, I've seen a lot of universities including Johns Hopkins using open frameworks and implementing best practices that are already there. Google and Microsoft and have lots of documentation out there for developers and best practices which are consumable. You can read them and then implement them. And we're very lucky to have a user experience expert, a director who can feed back what the industry is looking for or what they've learnt. And I think it is worth other organizations investing in that kind of expertise, somebody who does know how to get to read users' surveys and get that information back.
And that's well and good if you have a web person or you have a systems person on staff. I mean, I'm at a small, medium-sized state school, and I know in 6 months I will be responsible for that interface. I'm not a programmer. I'm certainly not a programmer. I like computers. I know how to use them, but I'm also head of cataloging. I don't have the time to go out there and look at all those user studies. I just don't have the time. And I don't think our users do, and I probably don't have the expertise to implement them. Now, if I have a discovery tool, the vendor says, here's the options. I said, okay, great. I can move on to that. If my reference staff don't like it, 6 months later, maybe a year later when there's an update, I can click on it, change the box. I would love to say, yes, we have a full-time programmer on staff. I was in an environment where there were 2 libraries. We had the same ILS as a much larger university had. And somebody on my staff said, how come their site looks so much better, it's so much more fluid? I said, because they have 3 full-time programmers on staff. I share one with 3 other departments. And when you have the resources, you can do that. When you don't have the resources, even though the information's out there, and I agreed, it is, and those toolkits are out there, I don't have the time, and I don't have the expertise.
What about asking the vendors, rather than having something that's totally customizable and you can fiddle with each part of it, what about asking them to develop 3 or 4 different totally working setups that address different...
And that's what I'm suggesting. And that's what I'm suggesting is that the vendors do these studies, and when I get the product and the deliverable, they show me 5 or 6 options on the screen and say, yeah, this is the one I like. I'm going to run with this. And if it doesn't work, I'll give you feedback, and then next year when you come up and say, here, we've got these 5 more. Sort of like if I'm doing a PowerPoint, I can go online and search for wallpapers. Even though I got a couple on my desktop, I could search the vendor site for different interfaces and say, yes, I like this one. I'm going to run with this one. And if it works good enough for me, I'm happy. If not, if I'm willing to pay the time and the money to have a customized program, then that's a choice I make. But let the vendors do this work for me, and let them get feedback from other sites and say, here are 10 options. Which one do you like? I like that one. Okay, fine.
Like your small school, not all vendors have the resources to develop and offer options for interfaces. It is it's time intensive, it is money intensive, and there's the essence of your product that you're putting out there, and just the support of one interface is significant. The support for multiple interfaces is almost unheard of.
I'm not disputing that at all.
Yeah. And another point, I think I'm hearing 2 things here. That there's a desire for options before a search, and then there's options for after a search for those who have a better idea of which direction they want to go to. They want to be able to check off a couple of boxes before they run their search. Then there's others who don't have that direction and prefer to have those options to check off a few boxes after they toss in their first search term. It's a tough environment to try to provide both of those scenarios, and I think you go for what current standards and trends are in the interface based on usability studies and things like that.
One of our goals today is to ask NISO to do something. Okay. So it's to what NISO can do on this topic. And I think what Jonathan was suggesting is that since everything is evolving so fast and neither smaller vendor nor libraries can keep on doing testing and usability testing and those kind of things. It could be something that an institution such as NISO can do on a regular basis in order to search not only the trend but the needs. Because sometimes we go for the trends, but we are not so sure if the trends are what the user need. So that can be something that NISO can do.
So one of the biggest aspects that our users have trouble with user interfaces is the use case where they start with Google or they start with Google Scholar. They link to a resource, whether it's through an open URL, direct link, whatever it is, and they hit some sort of a paywall. And some websites, some publishers do a better job of navigating the user to a single sign-on solution at their institution, and some don't do as good of a job. Users are hit with kind of a dead end. This is it's not really discovery, it's more the delivery side, but it is user interface, and it becomes the #1 issue that our users run into. It's the biggest source of trouble tickets that come to our information desk. So there was something that NISO did a couple years ago. They had a SSO group establish recommended practices, and there was some uptake amongst some of the publishers to do a really good job of implementing those best practices. Something that maybe NISO could do is a follow-on to that to possibly see where we are with that, because it still remains. I don't know what other libraries experience, but for us, that's still the #1 issue that's reported daily.
In yesterday's session the roundtable, we talked a lot about open web and getting into the library resources, and this was again, a NISO recommendation. But some of the folks at the table, some of the solutions were to be able to have some kind of registry or something that associates the user with, the library that they can get access to. So there's some implied giving of exchange of information to be able to authenticate people in, I think. So that was like a difficult topic as to how can you, provide access. So I didn't know if anybody else had other ideas, but that was one thing that came up yesterday.
Well, I mean, vendors all have some configuration for each of their customers, whether it's an IP list or some that implement things like Athens and Shibboleth have attributes per site or per customer. JSTOR actually does a really good job of their navigation, where they can list users. Users can search for, our users can search for Johns Hopkins, start typing in Johns, and Hopkins will come up, or navigate by geographic location or whatever. And whether you're Shibboleth, whether you're Athens, whether you're using Easy Proxy, they can navigate you to an authenticated link. Maybe they're very advanced compared to others, but they have, I guess they have some sort of registry to that effect that they can say, oh, this customer's preferred method is Easy Proxy, this one's preferred method is Shibboleth, and here is how to guide that user to Shibboleth.
I think that works
a lot of the time, not all of the time, but it's not fail-safe, but certainly could be, maybe handled better across the board.
So one thing that we know we need to do and we don't do it is, there's the other option of trying to start the user in a place where it's going to be easier for them to access. And I like what Gail Cengage does with the CMS systems, with integration into the course management system. Because if they've already authenticated to get into their Blackboard site, then they're good to go. And actually, one of my staff members will be working on pushing us a little bit more thoroughly in that area. So we have some learning to do about it, and I don't know the extent to which all of the vendors work as well with CMSs as Gail does. But that's another entry point where they're coming from sort of a safe zone where the access will be a little bit simpler.
I was just going to say that it is even being in the same company a little tricky when you have, sort of different systems that have to talk with each other, but that, certainly is a goal. A lot, we've been, using Gmail as well as institutions adopt Google Education, so that might be another possibility, although that always raises privacy flags, I think, as to what Google's really doing with the information. I was curious about the role of analytics too, because that hasn't come up yet either in terms of helping to fold that back into better user design. So I don't know what you may be collecting to help better inform, or what kinds of things you would like to see that could provide that sort of, well, in the example of, if you have some adjustments you can make to fit a profile of user, then to be able to have some kind of analytics to say, yeah, that worked, or it didn't work, or I want to, that profile A didn't work, I want to try B, or even, being able to play around with 2 different A/B testing and that kind of stuff. Is there interest in analytics? And
It sounds like what you're trying to describe is a sandbox. If there was a sandbox where those options were, and that customers and users could go in there and play with them, and then give you feedback saying, I like this, I don't like this, I like this because of this, or here's what I don't care about it. But very often that environment is called a sandbox, where people can go in and play and see what happens.
I think analytics is very important, and I don't think it takes some expertise in learning how to use the analytic tools and to actually make an effort to see, what they bring back. So it's hard to actually, it's a high barrier. You have to kind of go and learn how to learn the analytics or get some training in it. But it's very useful if you make a change in your interface and then you know what the baseline is before you make the change, and then you go back to your analytics after you make the change. You can work out the impact, and then your decisions on how you evolve your user interface are based on data as opposed to hunches. And then you can always revert if it didn't work, or if you found it wasn't available. It's very useful, but it's very hard to find the time and find the expertise to learn to use it.
We've learned a lot about our user interfaces from more qualitative data than quantitative data. My colleagues here have mentioned that we have a user experience director, and we've done a lot of inquiry with our users, whether it's generative or very focused and scoped, or whether it's just understanding behaviors. We've really been able to ask questions and narrow down and get rich feedback, which helps us make decisions about how our interfaces are designed. But we haven't put as much emphasis on our user interface design towards the quantitative data that we've gathered from statistics. Even though we do a lot with Google Analytics, it hasn't really shaped, I think, as much the design of our interfaces.
would you want Google Analytics in your discovery service?
Sure. I mean, I think this is something we've put Google Analytics on a lot of our library pages and things that we control. and we're just learning about how our library interfaces are used, and we can learn from. There's lots of different aspects of Google Analytics that we can learn from, observe, and make decisions on. So I think I don't know if you guys use Google Analytics, put them on your websites, and then if you learn anything from them, what is it that you're learning?
So I was just going to say, I mean, numbers scare me. And Dave's correct. I mean, we've been really lucky on the user experience end to have a lot of qualitative data. Quantitative stuff is more difficult. So it would be, and you know, going back to we all have too much on our plate, but I would love to have a discussion with you about how you think the analytics could benefit us, and then put together some type of a project that would make that work. And actually, I need to contact you about something else anyway. But for vendors to do that, to kind of push some of that information and help us think about how we can use their analytics more intelligently, I think would be great. So.
Addition to that, like I would suggest like maybe eye tracking or like the heat maps. These would be like very beneficial and give a lot of like the information regarding how the user behave on that page, especially if you want to increase the search and clicks and the discovery page. I think those are like the addition to Google Analytics or like the analytics platform would be beneficial tools.
Few years ago now, not too recent, like I think it was 2011 something. We did with like testing. Everybody does testing with user. But what was really interesting is that we had them, we recorded their faces and where they were looking at when they were doing the search. And that was really interesting because they were looking at area of the pages that we didn't think they were going to look at. So of course those things everything is useful, but time and we don't have time to do each year such big things. So of course if vendor or an independent institution could do sampling testing like that will be very useful for other people.
What I think it's safe to say, because I think we have to start looking at wrapping up, that what for a horizon topic, what we would like to look for NISO to do is to look at doing some usability studies or serve as a clearinghouse for possible interface design and results, not specifying what is, but help set down some guidelines for collecting these possible environments into a way that we could look at them and play with them, maybe create a sandbox, or at the very least some guidelines as to what's working and what's not working. Is that something that we would like to come out of this group when we're done? I see head nodding yes. So.
And let me answer that on behalf of NISO. Hopefully I won't get into trouble. This is now committed to film. But, but Scott, you're totally right. We're not necessarily with this entire program looking to do a standard or best practice. We're looking for recommendations. We're looking at a way forward that kind of paves the way for something more robust. So let's say that for the live stream as well. We're not trying to solve everything right here, right now, but you know, bringing folks together, that's what we do best. Right. So, right.
Like I said, creating a shell for that information to be circulated, not to say this is what you should do, but to create an environment to collect that information, to collect those ideas.
I'm wondering if there might be interest in like an educational forum like this where we could have, you know, even people from outside the industry presenting. Yeah, Juliana likes that idea.
And 2016, we're already starting the program for next year.
Yeah, so
absolutely.
Maybe some folks from outside the industry.
Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, instructors,
and the iSchools, I think, would be great resources. I know University of Michigan's in our backyard, and they have some awesome people there.
Depending on who's reporting out, say that when you're
Yeah.
reporting out.
Okay.
Yeah. Because my nod needs to get that nod.
Okay. Lots of nods.
Yeah, lots of nods. I think we have 5 more minutes, and we're at 11:30. That's when he wanted to stop.
So who wants to report out and wrap up?
Magic wand.
Oh, but your perspective is good. I do have a question. It is very difficult often, particularly as you're trying to do, collect the kind of user research that this, informs, to do it internationally. It's, particularly if you're a U.S.-based company. So I don't know if you have, ideas about how differences.
Like I said yesterday, from an international point of view, it's not an interface issue, but it's very important. Everything is so English-based. And of course, I use English every day. Lots of university professors use English every day. But it's not the case always with students. When especially undergraduate, they come, and since when they use Google, they use it in Italian. They expected to use it on the library website, on the discovery tool, et cetera, and they don't realize that in order to get more things, you have to search in that specific language. So one thing that will be great for the international community is the cross-language search. I know it's something for the future, is not there, but I mean, consider how has got Google Translator in the past 2 years. I mean, it had improved so much. I think we should start thinking about those things. And in Europe, they had set up work groups like the Europeana site. They thought about this, about the language difference. I mean, in the European Union, I don't even remember how many languages we have. So that's a big issue. And I didn't put it on the Horizon thing because I was the only one, so it would have been. But it is really an issue. And so that's it.
Well, I think you've touched one of my pet projects that I think the way forward with that is like the VIAF is a good way to that, so that you type a search in your library in Italian, like a person's name or something like that, and it searches a library in France. It'll look for that term, what's used in Italian, find the French term, and then put that term into the target search environment. That's a very rudimentary example, but I think the concepts are there. So, we're getting there. It's just it's not easy, and there's a lot of issues.
Who's recording?
Wait a minute, what?
You talk a lot.
You know, Kate, I don't like the way that came out.
So for the folks on the live stream, we're wrapping up the work on this table, and we're going to bounce back to the full group. So. All right. Do we have the... Can we turn the speakers back on? Okay. So we're going to get... we're going to start the reporting process. Is every... Does anybody need a couple more minutes, Nettie? Does anyone need any more time? Couple more, a minute or so to wrap up? You're good? Is everyone, all the tables finished? Good? Okay. All right. So again, temperature check. Useful, sounded like there were really useful conversations going on. Everyone agree? Yes? Hands up? Good idea? Excellent. Not so many hands over here? Okay. So who would like to kick us off? Gonna go start up here?
And I'll stand, but I'm going to stare at my laptop while I do it and try to repackage our conversation a little bit. We're the second topic, which was about personalization, and I'm trying to remember, echo chambers, I think were the two keywords in that. And so we talked about both of those and also got into a privacy discussion a little bit and tried to maybe give some ideas of what NISO could do. So along the lines of personalization, I think we started off with talking about Google, as every good conversation goes, and a little bit about what they are able to do in terms of personalization. We talked or had the question come up about sort of the self-setup of personalization, where the user has to make the configuration changes to personalize something versus having that done automatically for them. And I think at one point it was suggested that Shibboleth was supposed to be the solution for that, but maybe hasn't ended up being that perfect solution, somewhat due to the fact that the metadata that's passed by Shibboleth can be garbage, I believe was the term put on it. And that, of course, varies per institution, so I'm sure some institutions have perfect Shibboleth metadata. So I guess bridging from personalization into the echo chambers idea, we discussed the idea of personalization, creating those echo chambers, and I think in the realm of Google and sort of pop culture, that's called an info bubble, where everybody personalizes things to the extent that they get kind of trapped in their own little world, and certainly we know researchers are capable of doing that as well, focusing so much on their discipline that they might miss connections between disciplines. So we talked about sort of how to build in randomness and serendipity and making it, I thought had an interesting discussion about about making that a user option so that they can say sort of, I want to be serendipitous now versus I don't want to be. And why that might be, it might be nice for them to be able to make that distinction, but might also not be an effective way to go about serendipitous discovery. Talked about RSS feeds as a possibility for that, although we also had the question of whether RSS feeds were still used. But it sounds like there are some uses. And then we also touched on, I thought the SSRN presentation yesterday and sort of having these different categories of related items. So what's hot, what's classic, forgetting the other two categories that were up there, but being able to kind of build that into a discovery environment. Privacy, of course, in personalizing something, usually you're collecting some sort of data. So privacy was a concern. I think there are various feelings around the table about, as there are everywhere, about whether it's okay to collect that data and how we can use it in sort of a responsible manner if we are collecting it. I think Steve brought up an interesting point about the university as an environment in which students live, and some of that data exists, and why isn't discovery sort of a system that's able to make use of that data in the same way that the registrar's office and the LMS are able to use that data. Maybe discovery should be able to. And in terms of NISO's roles, I think we talked a little bit about the possibility of providing some standards or some guidelines around sort of privacy ethics, as well as sort of a standardization of data for exchange. I think might have been the idea about people, users of systems, in particular, so that maybe vendors who create tools that can be embedded into discovery environments can make use of some of that personalization to customize their widgets. I'm not sure if that's a good representation of what we were saying. 50% I think I got on that one. So that's my editorialized summary if somebody else wants to add to that.
Any comments, questions, or thoughts about this topic? If there were a common set of metadata for personalization, would you temperature check amongst the librarians who care about privacy? Do you think that would be problematic? Is that a yes? Just raise your hand, or?
Yes, I think it would be problematic. You know, we rely on our central campus IT folks to do patron authentication through Shibboleth, and it's basically a yes/no. They are a current